Okay, I think we're live. How we
Hello.
doing? Fraser, how you
Doing
going?
good. Yeah, not bad. How are you?
Good.
Well,
So we've got Fraser and Chris. So, oh. Let me start recording too. I always forget that. Yes. So, you got a bit of news, Fraser.
yeah, not the best news, unfortunately, but news
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless. Mentioned a couple of times now that Gem and I have been working on Arvo in the hopes of getting some funding from Screen Australia, and we got news at the start of the week that we weren't successful this time
Mm-hmm.
around.
Yeah.
So a bit of a hit to the motivation, but we've got some plans that I can discuss today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, sort of how we're going to bounce back from it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got an interesting sort of trends insight report, which is sort of a collection that the Screen Australia has put together from all of the applications to, I think it's both the Emerging Game Creators Fund and the Game Production Fund, or maybe not. But there's some really interesting insights in there that we can go through.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll go through this first, eh? We'll go and have a look, and
Yeah,
yeah. So, I don't. Do you want to talk to this? This is your kind of your stuff.
yeah. I guess I think the important context for this is in the past, there was a single source of games funds through Screen Australia.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the exact name, but it was only a couple of years ago that they split it into the $15,000 Emerging Game Makers Funds, which is
Mm-hmm.
designed for microscale games and prototypes, and
Yep.
then the larger $100,000 uh, Game Development Fund, I think it's called,
Mm-hmm.
which is designed for completion of games or getting games to a state where they can go and receive further funding. They have another limitation there where it's up to $100,000 of funding for a game with a budget of 500,000. So that
Right.
gives you a bit of an idea of the scope.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so in that's the context for this, and then yeah, in here they sort of just dive into um, some of the stats and the trends.
Okay. So should we go through those?
Yeah, I think so. Um,
Can you see what I've got up on the screen?
Yes, I can see
Mm-hmm.
your screen. And I've got my copy up too. So,
Okay. So if you want to tell me
um,
when to scroll.
yeah, I mean, I think the first bit of interesting data is there's a couple of pie graphs just below the data section on the
Pie
next page,
graphs. Oh, look at that.
and so
Wonderful.
yeah, pretty self-explanatory. The number of applications per state for each round of funding. Um, I think
Interesting.
the
Vic in New
the
South
big thing
Wales.
is
So yeah, I'm just looking at those myself. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that is actually interesting. I When I read this earlier, I thought they said there was a larger proportion of WA and Queensland um,
Uh,
this time
so
around.
WA 10% for 2025 and
Yeah,
Queensland 16.
so it's up. Or sorry, WA is
Looks
down
looks
five
looks
percent
pretty.
from last,
Yeah, looks
and
pretty.
Queensland's up 4%.
Looks pretty consistent over those 3 years. Oh, hang on, that's 2 years, isn't it? 2024, April 2024, September 2024, February 2025. Okay. So no major. Oh, well, actually, South Australia has gone down. Go from
Yep.
13% to 7. Oh, there you go. You don't have quite so much competition from in South Australia.
Yeah, didn't help us unfortunately, but maybe next time.
Oh, interesting to see
Um,
that.
but yeah, generally it's grown, um, which uh, I mean, in my opinion, makes sense given the sort of climate in the industry and sort of
Hmm.
uh, the search for finding funding where you can. I do hope that this sort of speaks further up the chain to sort of the eagerness for sort of Screen Australia's funding um, in it.
Hmm.
But
What? Just,
no.
just, just, just from what you were just saying, I'm just interested to know what's your take on the sort of the impression of the industry at the moment, the current state of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously been a lot of layoffs going on for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, I actually am not super up to date with how those numbers are looking. I think sort of a couple months into this year, it became a bit much to keep track of. But I know for a while it was, layoffs all over the place.
Yeah,
In
I
terms
don't think
of
that's changing at the moment. So yeah,
yeah, that
that's
makes
sort of
sense.
still the case. Yeah, yeah.
In terms of like finding a job, I think in the 3 or 4 months that I was actively searching, I saw maybe 3 or 4 actual game development positions going.
Were you
At
just
least
looking in
relevant to
Australia?
me.
Were you just looking in Australia?
Yeah, I was. I
Okay.
was just looking in Australia.
Yeah.
I mean, I I'm seeing a lot of programming roles going,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't seem to be really game development. A lot of it seems to be sort of AI startups looking for people with some programming knowledge.
Okay.
But in terms of designer positions, it's minimal. Um,
Yep.
and then, yeah, in terms of money, I mean, I'm not, I've only been looking for a few months, but it seems to be pretty sparse, especially from what I understand in terms of like the layoffs and that. It's a lot of investment money has disappeared.
Yeah.
That's sort
So,
of my
so maybe
broad overview.
I'll give you a little bit of overview as I've seen it. So, with the what happened with all the money that was pumped into the system in the with the lockdowns, there was a lot of money sort of out there sloshing around, looking for somewhere to go, something to invest in. And a lot of that money ended up going into different games kind of industry things. And you can see a lot of sort of the outcome of that. And unfortunately, a lot of it sort of went, I guess a lot of it was invested without a lot of discernment to a degree as well. So we're talking sort of 2020, where are we, 2025 now? 2022, 2023, I think, I think it dried up around 2023. So there's a bit of an artificial bubble there as well, which kind of didn't help a lot of things. And we're seeing the outcome of that in many ways now. And seeing that money dry up, and a lot of studios closed down. There's other things happening there as well, of course. There are, we could talk about the state of the industry, the AAA industry, and what have you as well. But at the same time, I mean, it's important to keep an eye on the successes. So there's certainly things that are still being successful out there as well. And I have seen this before. So I saw back in 2009, 2010, there was a point where it was actually really hard to keep my students because the industry companies in Melbourne would come and poach them and say, hey, we've got a really good job for you, blah, 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 we'll pay your money and everything. So that was probably 2007, 2006, 2007. 2008, the financial crisis hit. That all disappeared. All the major companies went bust in Melbourne. I think, well, not all, but certainly most of them. But what was interesting that came out of that is you had because obviously there was a lot of indie developers hanging around then. You had this real flourishing of games, smaller indie type games coming out, and that was really interesting to see. So I guess I'm talking about the silver lining, that there are opportunities in these sort of climates, but I guess you've got to sort of be there, and you've got to keep a positive attitude and just keep working, keep plugging away.
Yeah, I mean, I do see that, and I do try to embody that as well. I think it's tough though when you look at things like the number of games released on Steam and all those sort of growth charts, where it's like every day there's more and more games being made and published, and so yeah, I don't know. I sometimes wonder if there's also like more competition. I mean, we're looking at it here for this, right? It's
I
gone
think
up.
the answer is yes, but looking at Chris, is it Pavlovsky? I think, or Chris. I always forget his last name, but How to Market a Game, Chris. He went through and he said there were 18,000 games released in 2024. And he said basically all but sort of maybe 2,000 were just slock. We're just not, you wouldn't even bother. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well. The fact, a lot of people are making games and it's just because the technology is available and there's something they want to do and they sort of put it out there and, they have no training. They have no necessarily sort of creative training or anything like that. And there's a lot of garbage out there. So I'm not sure that for someone who, has talent and has training, I don't know that the competition is as bad as it might appear from that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess maybe there's just more noise that you got to cut through. But yeah, like you said, if you have that dedication to it and, you'd go about it right, it is just a matter of cutting through it. It's not necessarily direct competition.
I think so. Yeah. So anyway, should we come back to this? Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I mean, the increase in numbers is interesting, and I don't know, I'm a sucker for a good graph, so seeing the split between the states and territories is nice.
Yeah.
Further down, they have their observations and takeaways.
How far down? Observation takeaways, yeah.
And so, yeah, this is where I was reading earlier. The state spread of applicants remained fairly consistent this round. The exceptions to this were Victoria and Western Australia, which between them accounted for increased volume of total applications, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if there's any particular reason. Obviously, they don't suggest anything, but if that's just chance, happenstance, or if those states in particular had some sort of motivation for people to be applying to it.
Victoria's always been pretty big in the games area. I don't know why Victoria and WA would be. So Victoria, we've got 26%. Yes, it's gone up 4% from April 2024. WA, yeah, I don't know. Went up to 15% here, but then down again there. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Yep.
Yeah, one of the others was with the introduction of the two funds to replace the singular, some applicants experienced confusion about the suitability for one fund over the other.
Mm-hmm.
That gave me an interesting moment when I was reading through it the first time, where I was thinking about, we've talked about the scope of Arvo and how, you I don't remember if it was on stream, you suggested maybe finding a third person to help, but then also still being aware of how large the scope has gotten. And it made me realize that maybe this Emerging Game Makers Fund isn't actually the one we should have applied for.
Mm-hmm.
Now that Gemma and I have this clearer understanding of Arvo, the concept and the scope of it, I think the larger fund might be more appropriate for the scope of game that we're trying to make. And then with an increased budget, we have a bit more ability to look for somebody else to join the team. And then also, we've been making progress. By the time those applications open again, if we wanted to, we would have things like a prototype that we can show off, which is sort of a key element of that larger application that's not present as a requirement in the smaller one.
So something I will say to you, and that's why one of the reasons I was asking whether you got feedback, because one of the things, I guess, and it was in that conversation, I think, that I was kind of alluding to that. One of the things they're going to be looking at is your team able to finish that game? Is the team as it is at the moment actually able to create that game? And looking at just the two of you, who are both sort of more designers than coders or artists or 3D animators or modelers, to me the answer is no. So I would really encourage you to try and find, I would say two more people if you possibly can. You need an artist, someone who's dedicated to the art, and you need a programmer, someone who's dedicated to the programming. If you don't have that, Any funding body is going to see that as a really fundamental risk of the game never getting finished. So I think that's something you need to, probably you and Gemma both need to maybe think about, and maybe how you might find someone, because it is a team effort, and it's having those key people involved is going to be really important to getting, if you're looking for funding, and also for getting a game finished and being successful. Like having that team is probably really important.
Yeah, I agree. And it makes sense, like you said, looking at it from an outsider's perspective and just being like, well, you both are self-described designers who can do visual scripting, and then looking at the list of other things that need to be done in the game, especially with no evidence even that we have some of those skills. Definitely something to look into. For sure. There's a point here that spans the gap between page 3 and 4. We saw several notable shifts in the self-identified genres across this round. Action, platformer, and multiplayer, a smaller percentage of applications when compared to previous rounds, with an increase in applications selecting exploration, strategy, and visual novel. And then the number of games that self-identify experimental remains relatively high at around 11% of total applications. The most popular genre tag remains story-driven at 30% of all applications, up from 34% the previous round, demonstrating the keen desire for Australian game makers to tell authentic Australian stories. I think it's interesting to see visual novel highlighted there, especially given the general trend of visual novel games to be much more simple in terms of game mechanics. Obviously, there's always examples to sort of counter that, but generally. And I wonder how a game like that would fare in this sort of application process, especially the next sentence noting the experimental tag. And thinking back on it, it didn't occur to me at the time, but in this reflection, they did seem to have sort of a preference for the idea of experimental games.
Was that in the description? Did they say something about that in the description of the fund?
Yeah, I think somewhere in the documents. I don't remember if it was in one of the templates or on the page, but seeing experimental written out in this trend report, I was like, wait, I've seen that in their sort of submission stuff. And so,
what do they mean by experimental? Did they go into that at all?
No, that was my that was my thinking. Because I remember seeing it and being like, well, you could consider it experimental, but also I wouldn't personally. I feel like experimental really goes to those way more out there. Like I'm thinking, alternative modes of control and really breaking down the essence of a game. I feel like the majority of games, it's genre, and then with the sort of certain elements adjusted to make it new and unique. But I would love to. I don't know. Maybe I need to dig a bit deeper in their resources and see what they mean by experimental.
Yeah, if you want to go for that, I would recommend definitely work out what they mean by experimental. Because one of the things, government grants and stuff they do, basically there's just a tick the box. Do they tick that box or not? So unless if you say experimental but you don't actually give them what they want or describe it in the way that they want you to describe it, you might just get pushed to the side because you haven't ticked that box. So I mean, government stuff. It's like do they tick this box? Yes, no, no, then they're out, sort of thing. So stuff like that, you're going to be really, really careful about.
There's interesting points going to sort of what we were just talking about in terms of adding more people to the team. They've got here just down a little bit. Some applications had relatively large team sizes, 8+, and then they go on to talk about how they can't really accept an
Yes.
application like that because
For
they have to be very
$30,000, yeah. What are you going to be paying people? Yes, absolutely.
or not even 30, 15. This is 15 split, so
Oh,
uh,
15,000.
is the max for this
Oh, is
application.
it? Why was I thinking 30? So 15,000 between eight. Yeah.
Between 8 people.
Well, I mean, exactly. Exactly. Look. They're the sort of things that you're immediately out.
Yeah.
You're immediately out. So you need to really be thinking about stuff like that. Yeah.
And then on the flip of that, though, as well, they talk about in the next point.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, 44% were solo devs, um, and I
Okay.
wonder if that has sort of that flip. Like you were saying, the fewer people working on it, the sort of harder it is to justify or demonstrate that you have the capacity to get all of the aspects done. So I wonder if
As
a
as a
solo
solo
dev.
as a solo dev myself, I'd like to protest protest that. I could do everything I need to do. It just takes a bit more time. Look, it depends on your
Yeah,
skills. It depends on your skills. Yeah,
exactly. But also, like, there is, like you said, it might take you more time because
yeah.
exactly you're one person. And so I guess, yeah, I wonder if the application process has a bias for or against a solo dev, or if it really is just that case of demonstrating you have the skills and you've scoped it to be done in a sufficient time, given the amount of money that can
No, I
be
think
applied
so.
for.
Look, the interesting thing is I've seen some solo devs get stuff done really quickly, much faster than teams of 3 or 4 or 5. I've seen teams of 7 just crash and burn because the amount of management overhead required to keep a team of like 7 going is a lot more. And unless you've got someone who's sort of on that management full time and does it well, the team just doesn't gel, doesn't
Yeah,
doesn't work together. So, look, I think
and
three to
leadership.
four is ideal. Yeah, for this sort of thing, leadership as well, 100%, 100%. Sometimes you've got to be kind of like an asshole. You've got to tell people to work, do stuff. You can't, particularly if you're paying people and stuff.
Yeah,
You can't have them just dragging their feet. So, but solo, look, yeah, I'm a solo dev at the moment, so I'm happy with. Well, currently happy with me. I wouldn't mind maybe jumping into a team and doing something different for a change. But I've got a few other things to on my plate as well. So yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
There's another point in here, just acknowledging the economic recession and job layoffs being
Mm-hmm.
uh, likely being a big part of this,
Mm-hmm.
which I think it's I feel like anyone who applied for it already knows, but it's good to see it acknowledged. Um, and then yeah, the other thing that was interesting was they previously there's been very little information on how generative AI could or could not be used.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for me, I'm just outright not going to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just simpler and aligns sort of with the goals of the project. But it's good to see that they address it, and yeah, it seems like they've got a set of principles that they can actually refer to now. I had a quick look at it, and it seemed to be sort of pretty generic in terms of it, but maybe I missed some of the more specific stuff. But yeah, I'm seeing things like ethical use of AI,
Mm-hmm.
fairness, talent, creativity, transparency. So, um, you know, be careful. They're starting to get
Well, I like
those sort
that
of
that
things are
one
starting to
point
be.
here. I think this is an important one. Due to generative AI's inability to conceive original creative thought, I mean that's an important one. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's generative AI is great to create cliches. If you want something that looks like everything else out there, then yeah, generative AI will certainly give you that. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you're not maybe if English is not your first language, perhaps, and you just want something to be written up, like something you've written, and you want that to be, have the grammar and everything sort of better, perhaps that's the sort of time when you might reasonably use it. But in my experience, it's quite likely that people are just the AI slop, just going in.
And even in those situations, they've seen sort of trends of AI speech and like conversation to become, very generic, and there are people who say they can tell if something's written by AI through, the way the grammar is, or,
possibly,
repeated phrases and stuff. So it is, it's a push and pull in that very specific case. But
you want to be reasonably careful, for sure. But certainly the one about the creative original thought, that to me is that's the crux of it, and that's what AI does not do. It can't create original creative stuff. It just comes. You can give it ideas. You can ask it to rewrite your stuff, but you can't really get it to create something original. So certainly I'd be wary of that.
This section moves into the most competitive applications. A lot of this is just repeated from the previous trend report, which is understandable. I imagine they see a lot of applications which didn't look at the trend report, and so therefore that you always get that sort of bottom level that's always that mix of things. So they say very basic things like, please use the templates we provide, please be clear and articulate.
Yes,
general good advice for any sort of practice.
That's like me saying please read the assessment brief and take a look at the rubrics and see where the marks are. there's always some people who don't. But the thing is, this is why doing when you come to applying for things like this, you need, it might sound simple, but you need to understand that if you're asked to do something and they give you a template or they give you clear guidelines, you actually need to follow them. So
I think the repetition is good as well, though. Like specifically to that situation, some of the best well, I wouldn't make it, maybe not some of the best classes, but classes where I was more able to stay on top of my assessments were ones where lecturers would regularly revisit the rubric, the brief, the marking, because at a certain point you might try to tune it out, but it's gonna make it through by the 4th, 5th, 6th time. But like you said, it's good to not have to rely on someone for that. That's something you should establish yourself.
Exactly. By the time you get to the end of the degree, you hopefully you kind of understand. If you've managed to get through, if you managed to pass everything, then that should be there. So I hope.
The interesting bits in here for me were specifically things like having a clear vision for the project. I think Gemma and I ran out of time towards the end, but we now have and this is one of the things we realize as we've continued to work on it while waiting for the application sort of update. It's like, there's some things we could have communicated way better, or there's some stuff missing that we just hadn't thought about yet.
Sure.
Things like they talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, right? Which is understandable given the whole premise of this funding. And we're sort of like a bit confused on what to put in there. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking like, it'd be really nice to have like an acknowledgement of country in the game. And I ended up speaking to Gemma, and I was like, I think it'd be really nice to have it sort of in those opening slate of titles, but then also having one in the credits. And little things like that, I think, would go a long way in the application to show we're thinking about that broad extent of things, rather than just saying...
I'd be wary going down that road as well, because of the sensitivity of the sort of I'm assuming you're not you don't have Aboriginal heritage. I'd be wanting to sort of check that acknowledgement of country. how does
Yeah.
that work in a game as well? That's
Well,
not,
because
it's not really Aboriginal. It's a virtual
no,
world. It's like,
but that's the thing, right? Like we
uh,
talked about it. Neither of us have any of that sort of history, so we didn't want to tell a
mm,
story that involved it because
yeah,
it's
no,
not our
no.
story to
You
tell,
need to.
and we
You
don't
got.
have the capacity to give someone with that story the space to tell it.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
it was a moment where I jumped onto one of the government websites.
yeah.
I think it was a South Australian website, or even I think Screen Victoria has it. Where they pop up and it just says, like this website is based, or in Victoria, like this is the Aboriginal land that it's based from, and we
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that. And
Mm.
so I thought, considering how much of Arvo is based on sort of the South Australian outback and like the places I grew up, I thought just having that acknowledgement um, just shows a bit more awareness than saying, I'm not Aboriginal, so I don't want to, tell a story
Mm.
that's not mine.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
I think
something
they
to
put
think
it in our
about for
mirror.
sure.
Yeah, and I just thought just a little statement, it might show more. But I think generally that lesson is there's a lot of those little things where we just hadn't had that 30-minute thought and conversation
Hmm.
to realize it was something that we'd put in there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, but that's, it's the first time you've done it,
Yeah,
so the process of doing it, now you're coming with those questions. Next time, you'll do
yeah.
better. There's no doubt. Yeah.
I it's I'm actually a little embarrassed that I hadn't even had that thought yet. I've been going through sort of, uh, the emotions around, being denied it, and sort of like trying to bounce back from that. But legitimately, it hadn't crossed my mind the fact that this is the first time I've ever applied for that.
Mm.
I've just been in this state of okay, well, what can I do better next time?
Yeah, good.
Um,
That's what
and
you
I
should be
think,
doing. Yeah.
I think that is good, but also, I'm like, oh wow, I did need that second just to acknowledge, like, of course, it wasn't perfect.
Ah,
The next one will be better.
what do they call it? Iterative development. So
Exactly.
that was your first go. You got it in. I mean, I think that's just a win. You got an entire application done. You've gone through the process. To me, that's a win. First time you do it, it's like the first game you publish. Okay, you may not sell a whole lot of things, but actually going through that process and publishing the game and getting it out there, that's actually part of a win.
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah. You need to look at it that way. You need to look at it sort of step by step. And getting money,
Yeah.
particularly in the moment, is really hard, particularly for a small team who's never published a game. It's quite challenging. So yeah, I mean, I think don't focus on the positive. Focus on what you're doing and think about it. Step by step, what you're trying to do today, tomorrow, and then consider 2 years down the line from here. Where you're going to be if you sort of keep going.
Yeah.
Because
I
that's
appreciate that.
that's a real 2 years is a really good time frame to be thinking about. So it's only where are we now? It's May. You finished your degree last year, so it's if you think about 2 years from the finishing the end of your degree, so we're only sort of less than 6 months in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a good point. I like that 2 years. Yeah.
Mm.
Gosh.
You've got to be thinking in those terms, particularly creative industries, because you've still got to develop your skills, your knowledge, contacts, getting stuff out there, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
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 The
Anything
rest
else
of this
to look at
report,
it?
it basically goes over the least competitive applications, but
Mm-hmm.
in summary, that's
Mm.
generally again more pretty obvious things like, don't just make a clone of Pokemon Go, and then basically just the opposite of that where it's like scope issues, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is where we fall into, and sort of communicating that.
Yeah.
Um,
Too ambitious for a first-time project without understanding the skills and resources. Yeah. I think this probably is the one that you really need to think about. Skills and resourcing needs. Yeah. And look, I find that hard. I actually find that very hard. Look, because I haven't, I've run a small company before, but you know, when you're talking about spending lots of money on people and stuff, and unless you're experienced in doing that, it can be quite a challenge. It really can be quite a challenge to sort of get your head around that. Going from personal budget to business budget, you know, is kind of a what would you call it? Like it's a bizarre step. You're moving out of your comfort zone. You know, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars is like what?
Yeah.
What are we doing? No, I can't do that. But you have to. That's the whole point. You're paying people's wages and stuff like that. So it's important to look
And
into
that's yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of what is happening with this self-employment class that I'm going through.
that. Mm-hmm.
One part is a business plan, and then the other part will be a financial plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, it'll be good experience for me getting that knowledge. But then also, if I can make a comprehensive plan, that's something that I can submit if we go back for another go at this grant.
Mm-hmm.
To say, hey, last time, and I think actually that's something I liked. They said is good applications that were resubmissions indicated what they had changed or done new
Yeah.
/ differently.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, saying, hey, I've gone and done this whole Cert 3, I've got an understanding of the business side of it now, and I've got a plan, financial and business plan in place. There's a lot of opportunities to try and do better and maybe come away with funding next time.
Are there any South Australia specific grants?
I don't remember there being. I know there was a New South Wales grant, or was it a Victoria grant?
There's definitely
I
Victorian
cannot
ones,
remember.
yeah. But
I
I
did know,
yeah.
with the business plan that I've been working on, there was a lot of tax rebates and a lot of like tax incentives that a lot of the states have, and also the national government. So
yeah,
I don't remember there being a specific South Australia one, but I know South Australia jumps in sort of the same level as the other states when it comes to those sorts of incentives. But
right. I would just check, because I think if there potentially if there's something you can apply for, there might be some more arts grants that maybe you might be able to fit into. Particularly if you're doing something based in South Australia, that's the sort of thing that you could get. That you could find a grant, one of the creative industries grants, because they do a lot of film stuff in South Australia. They've done a lot of film stuff in South Australia. So I'd be checking that, because I think there'd be more likelihood of getting a grant, a local grant, a state-based grant, less competition perhaps than Screen Australia.
Yeah, I think it's the SA Film Corps is sort of the film, TV, games unit.
Mm-hmm.
I am on their mail list, so I see it. I've just had a cursory glance on Google. I don't see any South Australian grants, but there is, what's popping up is a video game development rebate.
That'll do. That's a start.
Minimum of 250,000 spent and retained in South Australia. So something for if we do start to get any sort of success by the looks of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, most of what I've seen from SA stuff is things like Sage, the games exhibition.
Yeah.
And they have the playback, which is typically like a monthly thing. South Australia Games Association and Games Plus, which is like a industry socializing event. So it's, from what I've seen, it's more like events sort of. I can't think of the word.
Yeah. Cool. All right, no worries. Well, that's good to hear. Well, not good to hear that you didn't get it, but obviously, some learning experiences from applying. Yeah. So cool. Alrighty. What are we doing this week? So,
I know.
last week.
last week, yeah, we talked about the Avatar.
Well,
And I
last week we
said,
talked about.
oh,
Last week we went through all this stuff.
yes. Last
This
week,
week is the
my
Avatar.
job was to write some stuff down about the Avatar for Arvo. That's
Yeah.
where I was in my head.
Okay. Cool. So, yeah. So maybe I'll just recap some stuff, and talk about sort of various bits and pieces. So the Avatar itself. So if you remember the sort of the overall game, we're talking about the player experience being the focus here. The Avatar, game characters, game world. We covered all that. Looked at that last week, and then so yeah, we've got the Avatar here. So the player has a relationship with the Avatar, and if we remember correctly, it's kind of interesting to go into this. So an avatar is a digital character or representation that the player controls within the game world, serves as the player's identity, allows them to interact with the environment, complete objectives, and experience the story from a personal perspective. And also, avatars can be highly customizable, reflecting the player's choice in appearance, abilities, and even personality. So we went through that stuff. So also, now you're all good with that, yeah? That's kind of just repeated from last week. If you've got questions, just stop me and ask. So like the game itself, there's we sort of break the relationship into personal relationship and functional relationship with the avatar. And so we can kind of see here we've got same sort of thing. So we have a personal relationship, emotion, mind, mental state, meaningfulness, social interaction. Functional relationship focuses on input and output. We'll talk a little bit more about that, what that kind of means. And then the avatar, avatar attributes. This time, sort of genre and theme we've already kind of like defined in the sort of level above. So if you kind of, you can think of it sort of hierarchically. The game is the sort of level above, and we've talked about that. We talked about the genre, the theme, etc. We should have defined that sort of at this level, I guess I would say. So that's still important when we come and talk about the avatar. And obviously the genre and the theme are going to impact a lot of things. But the focus is really going to be the art and the story. So that'll make sense?
Yeah, I guess the way I'm thinking about it is like, if the genre is encompassing the fact that it's a first-person shooter,
Yeah.
then it's obvious that the avatar will be a first-person perspective. There's not any wiggle room there. Whereas the art and the story, that's where there's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
In relation to Avatar. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me just show you an example. I think probably need to go into this. So this is so look at this. So this is kind of where we're wanting to be at. So if I give you, if we have a look, the first level. So this is Silent Hills PT. This is a little bit different because this is an analysis of a game, but it's the same format. So essentially we've got our brief description. So this is the top level. So this is the brief description of the game, actors and components. We do talk about the avatar, but we're going into more details. So you'd have this sort of thing at the top level, a little bit on the story, aesthetics, actor relationships here as well, etc. So once we've kind of defined that, we can then go down to the next level. So we're kind of assuming everything, we've got all this from the top level, but then we're going into more detail with the avatar here. So again, we've got the description and so I might, well, hang on, I'll come back to this. So let's have a look at representation as well, which is really important. Head bob. Got a video there that I actually put together as, that's interesting, it's resized, that I based that on. The avatar height and size, so things like that. You ever think about that, when you're defining an avatar, how big are they? Like, you don't necessarily think about that off the cuff. Oral or sound, representation. So And then down here is also interactions, player input. I mean, kind of simple stuff, but of course you need to define these sort of things. If you're asking coders to create this stuff, you want to have all this there. Then there's also the output, the HUD, in-game menu, etc., audio output, and then relationships. So I just want to give you... Now again, this is from an analysis, but this is still the sort of thing you'd kind of want to have ultimately. So let me just... The description here. So the game is in first person. So the avatar is generally not seen when playing the game. There are two exceptions to this. The first is at the start of the game where the avatar lifts himself up off the floor and the player can see his leather-clad arms and hands. The second is when the player is in the bathroom and can see the avatar's reflection in the badly scratched mirror. Both sightings give the player the impression of a distinctly male character clad in a well-worn leather jacket. Perhaps the type of man who would look at home astride a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. The heavy footsteps that can be heard when the avatar is walking help reinforce his image. The avatar never speaks, and there are no specific atmospheric sounds or music that represent him. Because the game is about a husband who murders his family, the persona of our avatar is important to the story and how the player potentially connects to it. If the avatar was female or a child, for instance, it could completely change our relationship to the game. The slow movement of the avatar encourages exploration and observation of the game world, which is heavily story and atmosphere driven with simple puzzles. There's no HUD on the screen, which provides the player with a clear window into the world through the eyes of the avatar. Apart from moving and looking around, the only way to interact is with the zoom function, which is simple and surprisingly effective. Zoom can be used at any time by holding down the right-hand mouse button. If the player zooms in on an object such as a piece of the photo, piece they need to find, it triggers an action. The game is fairly low-key regarding objects that can be interacted with. So, yeah, that kind of gives you an idea of the sort of thing that we want to come up with. And things also here, so there's some interesting stuff, and again, this is an analysis, but I think analysing games, I would certainly encourage any game designers to play as many games as you can, but play them intentionally and actually analyse them if possible. So for instance, you wouldn't notice this unless you were really looking at it, but you've got here that the avatar has a slight lilt when walking through the game world. Looking at it closely, it feels like the character is tilting slightly from the hips at each step. Unusual but quite effective for this character. Maybe that is designed to give a lumbering quality to the avatar. So it's subtle, so it doesn't create the nausea of experience in other games. So I really dislike head bob. I tend to turn it off in games that I play, such as Unreal Tournament. Where I know I turn it off. Also notice the camera moves slightly when the avatar is standing still. So this is another really interesting thing, to look at. The actual camera is moving even when your avatar is standing still. So yeah, why, how, what does that mean? So reminding me of the movement you can see in games like PUBG when you're aiming at a scope. Again, this is very effective and something I might use. Could be that radius, use the camera shape component to achieve this. So that's within the Unreal Engine. So that's an example. Got any comments or questions, observations?
Only that in preparation for the stream, when I was typing up some of our thoughts on our avatar for Arvo, I was using this as sort of a template, and
excellent, well done. Good.
Yeah,
good.
And just like you said, things like the head bob and the slight movement. I think we talked about it when we played through PT, but
we may well have,
yeah, just those little things making really, I guess, like subconscious impacts on the player, but that do a lot to flavor or sort of theme any sort of interaction and the player experience.
Yep. Cool. Excellent. All right. Cool. So you're well prepared by the sound of it. That's really good. So let me just moderately.
I had to find that motivation.
Well, okay. Well, we need to get you motivated. Strong coffee sometimes helps. So there's an example. So the avatar attributes. Yeah, we've got genre. Again, these ones. Not the core ones, although they certainly do impact. The art, well, the story number one, I'd say, well, okay, there's different ways to design an avatar and different ways to design characters. You can have art-driven design, which is absolutely fine, or story-driven design. So depending which one you have, might sort of change some of these things. But generally, I've got story here. What I'd kind of recommend, if you've got your story set down, then you want a detailed character sheet sort of answering the sort of following questions. So who is the player? Who is the player character? Who are they in the game? And that might be a fairly complicated question, particularly if you've got multiple options for your avatar. What's their character arc? So if you're familiar with any screenwriting stuff, characters go through an arc. They start at a particular place. They go on a journey. They change, and then they end up and usually sort of come back to the same place. I'm not going through sort of the narrative theory here, but that's kind of the way that it goes. So, what's the character arc of the player? So the player themselves, are they going through some sort of arc? So how do they change throughout the story of the game? What do they look like? This is a very good question. We sort of spoke about some of this last week. And what are their main personality traits? So you want to sort of have all these things, or more. The more you have, like if you hand this to your artist and say, "Hey, I want some do me some character sheets that might fit this," then you've got something to give them immediately. And the representation, and we did talk about this last week. Does the avatar have a character model? So the easiest answer for first person is no, because that's the least amount of work. The next one though is, does the avatar speak and or make sounds? So making sound can be very effective to set the theme and everything. And then of course, having your concept art. So being able to give, like I was saying before, give an artist a detailed character sheet and say, hey, come up with some concept art of the character for me. And then that's kind of what you get. So effectively, if we just go back where we were, so we got the avatar here. So effectively the same kind of thing. Now so I've gone through and talking about this. So the player is playing actually as a little boy. The avatar must reflect this identity. So that's a really important part of it. Nowhere in the game do they realise, they explicitly told that's the case. But when I've done tests, they actually, the players quite often pick that up, which is kind of interesting. So you've got all the information down here as well. So movement, etc., etc. Camera, where the camera is going to be, how high off the ground. Field of view. So there's all sorts of stuff down here. I mean, at this point, we're wanting to keep it pretty high level, but eventually you want to go down to that detail. So there you go. That's the sort of stuff. So I guess we'll talk about today.
I've got an interesting thought off that because I finished Yakuza Kiwami a couple of days ago, and so I just keep thinking about it, unsurprisingly. But I'm thinking about Kiryu, the avatar, the player character. One of his defining traits is sort of having this really strong moral compass and sticking to it. And I don't remember the video. I saw a YouTube video. I think it was just on for a couple minutes, but they were sort of asking why Yakuza sort of has this one relationship with the player compared to a game like GTA where it has another one. Sort of saying, in GTA, people will just go and run over pedestrians and, there's no consequences. That's the fun of GTA. But in Yakuza, you don't get those sort of things happening. And they were arguing that based on the gameplay of Yakuza, which limits you to only being able to fight bad people, big air quotes, what, Kiryu deems morally bad, so whether that's like other Yakuza people, gangsters and thugs and that sort of stuff, the gameplay limits you to only interacting within his sort of the character's moral framework. And I thought that was a really interesting. I know we sort of said story and art as sort of the defining features for the avatar. But I thought there was an interesting way in which the gameplay can help reinforce that.
Oh, I think. Well, I mean, I think that would be part of the story. I
Yeah,
mean, you would define. I think who is the player character. So I haven't. Obviously, I can't cover everything in here, but their moral framework for sure is a very important part of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's the way though that the gameplay limits you from acting out
Mm,
of that.
yeah,
And because we talked about it the other week,
yeah.
when the game lets you act in a way that doesn't align with the avatar, you see that cognitive, not cognitive, the ludonarrative dissonance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And yeah, I
So,
think that's
so effectively, that stuff impacts the functional relationship. You're prevented from doing certain things.
yeah.
Is that correct? So you can't kill innocents, if you like.
You can't kill anyone technically because that
Can't kill
goes
anyone.
against his sort of code. So
Uh-huh.
everyone you fight, they always just end up sort of either writhing around on the floor or they run away. You beat them up enough to
Oh,
make them
okay.
flee.
Okay. So you never kill anyone.
Yeah, and then yes,
Interesting.
also you can't fight regular sort of civilians on the street.
Right.
You only fight you can't just start attacking. You have a group of guys run up to you,
Mm-hmm.
and they're we're Yakuza, we're going to beat you up, and
Mm-hmm.
then you go into a fight where you can only interact with them, and then you complete the fight and they run away. So yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yes. So I guess that does make me think of another game from quite a while ago now, Aliens versus Predator, where you get to actually play as an alien. And this quite disturbed me when I played this game. This is probably 2012, maybe. And when you're playing as an alien, the way you heal is by eating people. And not only that, but when you, particularly when you get bigger, so you start off as like a little, you run around, you're this little tiny little thing. But then you get big enough to eat, to eat people. And you're there, and the person is crouching down, huddling down in front of you saying, "Oh, Jesus, oh God, oh, please don't kill me," sort of thing. And you're supposed to just kill them. And that's how you get your health back. I mean, I did not enjoy that aspect of that game. It was very... there's some real moral dissonance, I might say, in that. It was quite a challenge.
Yeah.
That one. Yeah, so I haven't seen that much since that sort of thing where you're just expected to kill people, thankfully. There's not been that many games around like that anymore.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm racking my brain. I can't think of any.
Yeah. Manhunt. Anyway, should we jump into the whiteboard?
Yeah, sure.
You've got stuff down here. You've actually been writing stuff.
Yeah, so
Hey, cool.
Gemma and I, we had a meeting on Monday,
Mm-hmm.
which went well, and then we were like, yeah, tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll make a template for the avatar based on like what you've shared with me and this
Mhm.
whole model, and
Mhm.
then we'll start filling it out. And then Tuesday morning we got the news that we'd been rejected, and so we sort of took some time to go and take our minds off it and
Fair enough.
do things fun. So
Fair enough.
this has
yeah.
all just been unfortunately I haven't had a chance to actually run this by Gemma.
Okay,
I'd
that's
like
right.
to do sort of either collaboratively or we'll go away, we'll do independent things and then come back and share, but I did this today.
Yep.
It's based on like everything we've talked about, but
Mm-hmm.
it's up for change essentially is what I'm
Sure.
getting at.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want to go through what you got there?
Yeah, on the Silent Hills analysis,
Hmm.
and I think it was kind of apparent when you were reading through it, but that description is kind of, to me, it felt like the overview of like all the other subheadings in that.
Yeah. The description, the beginning description. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
So I
that's
haven't
kind of the
liked-
introduction. If you're writing an essay, the introduction should tell you about sort of what's to come, kind of thing. So that's basically the same idea.
Yeah. And that's why I haven't really
overview.
fleshed out that part of it. in
Mhm.
here yet, because
Sure.
just like in an essay, I always write my introduction last.
Of course.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's very generic, just acknowledging the fact that Arvo is split perspective. So
Mhm.
as the avatar, you're in first person, but
Mhm.
when you're driving a vehicle, you're in third. And I don't remember if it was on the stream, but we talked about having a secondary avatar being the vehicle,
Yeah.
considering, you know, a majority, if not at least 50% of the game should be played while driving a vehicle. So
Mhm.
that sort of, we need to apply this same sort of an equivalent sort of overview to it.
Yep. Yep.
And then we talked about having no visible elements for the avatar because it reduces significantly the workload.
Yes.
But Gemma and we did talk about it on Monday. Sort of, we did like that idea of going with what you were saying. Where it's not necessarily that a silent protagonist is more immersive for a player, but there's less opportunities to break the player's immersion.
Yeah.
We talked about it with Faith from Mirror's Edge, where you can see her hands with her runner gloves, and she's got the funky ninja shoes, and you can hear her breath, and there's all those reminders of who you're playing, versus something like Half-Life where they try to minimize that. You just have the crowbar in your hand and that's it. So we want to lean even further into that. So no oral or visual representation for them.
Mm-hmm.
But it is still a narrative game, so the avatar is still acknowledged by NPCs and is critical to the plot that happens through the game.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think, sort of looking at your notes on like the head bombing, being cognizant that the avatar interacting with objects, the delivery boxes and the vehicles, does impart meaning to them. And so that's that brief description. In the representation, just restating, visually there's no parts, there's nothing to the avatar that they can see. The movement would have a walk, a sprint, and a jump, consistent with other games in the genre. I liked the height and size. It really got my brain thinking. And, like, I know that this player is going to be, the avatar is going to be human, but the player won't know because, well, they won't know explicitly, but things like, the fact that they are the right size to fit through human doorways and interact with things that were built for humans are all things that will suggest that they're, roughly humanoid. And then the NPCs being sort of bigger and smaller and in between. So, the player being that sort of average size. And then a bit more in detail about the physical interaction. So the fact that they can occupy a vehicle suggests that occupy and operate suggests that they have hands and legs and can operate the pedals and the steering wheel. And then Gemma has been working on the physics stuff, so we have there's more weight to different sized boxes, so the bigger ones are harder to move around, the smaller ones are easier, and they've got some nice friction. And so I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, if I had no idea, that would suggest that this avatar has some sort of strength. They can lift up small things relatively easily, bigger things less so. So they're not going to be able to lift up the car, for example. And then no vocalizations, because I think if we're going this far into not having a representation of the avatar, it would be really weird to then have like a hurt sound that could imply too much representation.
Can they be hurt? There's no combat in this, is there? There's
no. And so it's one of those things of, I can't imagine it, but also even in the sense of if they fell from a height, I feel like the typical thing would to have some sort of vocalization, but
so they can fall.
Avoiding that. Yeah.
Okay.
They will be able to.
They will be able to. Yeah. Okay.
But so even reducing that, so no vocalization, just footsteps at most. I think. Again, this is done today, so I'm probably missing some edge cases, but I feel like that's the whole point of this, right? It's we get it down, we come back, we add the detail later.
It's called design, iterative development. It's just you just keep iterating until you get it as to the point where you want it to be.
Forever. Yeah.
Well, no, no, not forever. Otherwise, you never finish anything. But yeah. I mean, look, the whole idea is you just keep iterating until you're happy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Yeah, and then interactions. I didn't, wasn't fully aware of it, but I guess it makes sense that in that page that you were showing, yeah, the representations are more going to be the personal relationship, and the interactions will be the functional.
Hmm.
But yeah, just more detail to it. I guess we've got the fact that the avatar can pick up objects, and they can enter a vehicle and operate it, and exit it, and they can speak to NPCs. And that's where the story will come through. And then outputs. I imagine with this sort of stuff that we talked about how the functional relationship is really well understood.
Hmm.
And so there's obviously things like the sound and the visuals, but one that Gemma and I had talked about the other day was having a crosshair to use as an indicator.
Hmm.
So having a relatively unobtrusive one, once you're close enough to a box, it becoming bigger or a different color or some indication to show the player, hey, you're close enough to this box, you can pick it up.
Hmm.
Being one of the major outputs for the player.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you want me to give you some feedback?
I would love some, yeah.
So the one thing that that I look at here, and I hear what you're saying about not having an avatar, etc., etc. The area where people are going to need to understand, and I think where you're going to need to understand who your character is where the NPCs, what their reaction is to the avatar, to the character. So I think you need to have a paragraph in there somewhere saying who the character is. So you haven't really, I think I think you've talked about it before, but who the character is in themselves and who the character is to the NPCs that they're interacting with.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I guess I don't remember if I talked about it because I have made, or I've started at least like a character sheet for the avatar.
Yeah, I think.
But
Have
yeah,
you
I see
shown?
what you're saying.
Is that on here? Have you shown it to us before?
I don't remember how far I got because that was before
I have to move this, don't I? You can't move on my screen.
No, I can't. But I'm just checking my drive.
So it's none of these ones that are on here.
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. I was thinking. Okay, so it's not. These are the NPCs.
Yeah, so it's really, really basic. And it's still, there's a lot to be done. But
I mean, you don't have to. You don't have to. Show it today if you want to, but it's up to you.
So there's nothing more than that. But in our template for characters, we've got in here relationships and story relevance, other things, inspiration. But I know what you're saying. Like once this is fleshed out, we need a paragraph sort of summarizing who the avatar is, and like you said, their relationship to the NPCs, because we need to have that set in stone so that we can make decisions designing the game and developing it.
And can that relationship change? I mean, like if they fail in delivering something or if something's broken. I mean, I don't know whether I don't think we've talked about these questions previously, but I don't know whether that's something you've thought about.
No, not particularly actually. In terms of failing and failure states. Hasn't the art sort of development process hasn't yet reached that point yet, which is interesting because now I've got 1,000 thoughts about what it could be, but I feel like on a gut check, the idea of having any sort of in-depth states for failing to deliver is gonna blow up the scope drastically. Um, but
Is
if
it
you
even a
offer,
possible? Is it a possible? Because we haven't really covered this. I think even in discussion of the games, like are there success and fail states? Like how do you progress in the game? How do you pick up
yeah,
and that's we don't have to cover it today, but these are obviously questions that need to be answered at some stage.
yeah, that's it. I mean, at this stage, it's still intentionally left unclear so that we can solidify the things around it, and that'll help
Fair
build
enough.
the answer. And I think that's good for us because when I was first thinking about this, it was very much the quests were delivering a specific package to a specific person.
Hmm.
And the package might be a different size, or you might have multiple to make it more interesting. But in the process of coming up with characters and NPCs, we started to think about, well, what if we did different mission types? So it's not just deliver the package, but maybe there's a character, an NPC that wants you to go and do dangerous stunts because
Hmm.
they're an adrenaline junkie, and so want to see you do big jumps and drive fast. And so there might be some missions that don't strictly follow that sort of deliver the package
Hmm.
structure, but still engage with the mechanics and maybe highlight different aspects. So yeah, that sort of the idea of what does a failure state look like, it's still even more nebulous than that. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, that's something that we'll certainly flesh out
Yep.
over this period. Then that's absolutely not a problem at all. Um, cool. So a lot of that's kind of that's good. Obviously, you're fleshing it out and building it up a little bit more. Um, what are other things I was thinking about? Not too many. Um,
I think for me, reflecting on sort of writing this chunk down,
mm,
I put it in the Canva so that you could see it easily.
mm-hmm.
But then I was also like, oh well, then I can make more use of the medium being a whiteboard, like we've done for, you know, uh, previously having more like word cloud sort of association stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think if I were to do this again, I would try and leave it more mind mappy,
Yeah,
um,
it's not a bad idea. I
and
mean,
then
yeah,
yeah, collate it into a document
and
afterwards.
also getting. I mean, it's really good to use inspiration material and stuff as well. So thinking of games you played or characters you like or anything like that is always not a bad idea to do.
Yep.
I mean, eventually you want to get to the sort of text, but I guess you've kind of
Yes.
jumped the gun a little bit um, at this point, but which is kind of fine. So where was it? Speaking to NPCs. So when the avatar is close to an NPC, the player can press E to speak to them, open the text. Okay, yeah. I guess there's questions about. So if I think of say Death Stranding, you generally only speak to NPCs. Well, if I think of the way you actually start a begin and end a delivery, you go into a particular place. There's there's like console things they have, and you pick up your deliveries, go into this amazingly confusing dialogue thing, get your stuff, and then head out, make your way across the terrain, and get to another one of the same sort of places, the delivery pickup sort of things. I don't remember what they're called. So I mean that's one solution to, and then you don't really talk to NPCs outside of that. I mean, you do it to a degree, but it's mostly, I guess, it's mostly a lot of cutscenes. There, they talk to you, but you don't necessarily talk back.
Mm.
So I'm just thinking off the top of my head of one example that I can think of of a delivery type game. But that, you may decide on a completely different
Yeah.
approach.
I think in terms of the delivery, I like the idea of essentially each NPC being physically present and having a specific spot for the package. And so
Right.
when you start it, you speak to them, and then when you finish the dialogue, the package is there in that spot, and you've been given who it's going to and where they are. And so when you find them, you put it
Mm-hmm.
in the spot, and then you speak to them.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like being able to speak to them outside of the specific quest delivery sort of parameters,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Baldur's Gate 3, where when you're at camp, everyone is standing by their own tent, and then if I'm remembering correctly, when they have new dialogue to talk about, they'll have like an indicator to show the
Yeah.
player, like, hey, if you go and have a conversation, they'll have something new to say. I
Right.
kind of like
right.
that idea
Okay.
of, maybe you have 3 or 4 NPCs in one shared space, and so
Mhm.
if you deliver something to one of them, you might go, oh, that person wants to talk to me as well, and based on their sort of proximity to other characters, can help sort of establish the relationship they have with them.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, this is still a lot of that sort of nothing set in stone. It's just sort of a mix of the inspirations and what we do have, like the mechanics wise, and how they sort of inform each other and what makes sense logically.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah. So, I'm not sure. Is there much else that we can do with the avatar? I think you've kind of ticked all the boxes at the moment. It's a case of just reiterating and adding detail and stuff. I guess.
Yeah, for me, I want to have a look at your like your game and its documentation, because there is a difference between when you're designing it yourself and when you're analyzing it, and so especially like a lot of the more technical stuff, I know that's not super important in this very moment, but it is something I think if I look at it now, I know what I'll have to do in the future.
Yep.
But yeah, otherwise, yeah, I'm not sure. There's not. I spoke to you offline about this, but Gemma and I wanted to take a little break from Arvo and doing a lot of work focused on it in pursuit of trying to come up with something we can publish on a much tighter schedule.
Yep.
So, yeah, I might not have a lot of new things to show when it comes to Arvo, but I think there's enough here that, like, kind of like what we've been doing now, if you ask questions, I'll have enough knowledge to say, here's what I'm thinking, or here's what we could do, or if not, then yeah, I'll say, well, we haven't got that far yet.
Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, in coming weeks, the plan, basically... So we've talked about the avatar today, which is great. Next week would be game characters and then game world. There's also some other stuff that fits in there sort of within all this around then sort of player experiences, which we haven't really gone into. But player experiences, talking about the delivery, what happens in the delivery. Player experience is what you actually kind of do within the game itself. Obviously, including things like the game characters, the game world. Obviously, the avatar is going to be involved in that as well. So we can talk about all of those also. But yeah, game characters and game world would be next week. I don't know whether we need a week on each of those, or we'll see how we go, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
Sound good?
Works for me. Yeah.
Cool. Alrighty. We're actually a little early. We're finished. I feel like we're finished early. This is. Should we wrap up there?
It means I got to talk slower. I feel like
You're gonna talk slower.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened different this week. Maybe we just didn't have that much to do. We talked about a lot of other stuff to begin with. Or maybe we're just getting... Look, the thing is, once you've done a lot of the big parts, when you start getting into some of this, there is kind of maybe less to talk about, or there's more detail to go into. So not every section requires the same amount of work, and sometimes it's just going away and looking at different things. So that's cool, no problem. We might wrap it up there. We'll have an early day, like 9 minutes early. Wow, there we go. Cool. Alrighty, so we might do that. All our loyal listeners out there, thanks for coming, and we'll see you same time next week, Thursday.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds good to me. Alrighty, catch you all later.
See ya.